Yo, hello. Right, back on the Narcissus. All completed, everything's on it, all the little side pieces done. Find the stand. All the little side pieces done. There's a secondary piece of detailing that goes on top of the cut perspex underneath here. This is in thin plastic card, that's all done now. We've got the little docking clamps finished with their little push-in pieces to fit over the armature in the end of the wings here. This one is the left and this one is the right. So that's what they do. Simply push into there, finishes off the detail, and we're now ready for paint. So here we go with the weathering. First thing we're going to do is look at the references, and then we're going to put on the first very thin layer of tone. We're not looking at details, we're just going to do tone to get the whole thing working. What we're looking at is the tone of all these different areas relative to each other on the model. So this triangular side, you can see this panel here is considerably lighter than the rest of them. That's nice and blank almost. We've got shading inside here. We've got shading inside here, but the shading isn't the same all over the model. There's a very dark area that runs through as a streak on the base layer. There's two dark areas on that between those panels, two between those, one here, down to one here and one here. And it runs off in this direction. The streaks on the surface of this. I'll get a closer picture. The streaking on the surface in these areas. There is water damage on this image, which makes these photos tricky to follow. The decals, which are printed in white and black, are actually over the top of the weathering. The white is picked out as a much brighter area than the overall colour of the model. So the high spots, the brightest areas, are on the decals, which means the weathering is underneath. So what I'm trying to do is get this subtle shading down these panel lines, darker, more intense in the areas where it's supposed to be, and lighter in other areas, and follow the whole model. Don't concentrate on just this little thing and try and replicate it, because you'll do that and you'll find that this might be a little bit too dark for something else over here. Before I get stuck in, here's the final beauty pass in pure white with no weathering, pristine model. Massive shout to Mark Ingplan for making this kit and designing it, doing all the bits. What a piece of work. This is a phenomenal model. I don't think I've ever worked on anything that has been so accurate and so stunning before. It was only yesterday that I came to realise what I'd actually made. Spent so much time doing it, I never even saw it for what it was. And now it's come together, all filled and finished. It just looks the absolute nuts. Okay, I'm going to start on the bottom of this because it's not the face of the model. It's a nice detailed area, but the face is really important, and I want to make sure that I've got my technique sussed so that when I get to the important bit, the main face of the thing, I know what I'm doing. So I'm starting on the bottom. So the first thing to do is to flip this model over, and probably the first time you'll see the size of this thing. So here we go, let's have a look. Let's turn this over. Alrighty, now we can work on the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to be starting with the darkest section here, just because that's pretty simple to do in comparison to the shading down here, and it'll give me a good reference for the darkest point on the model. So the original model was painted in pure white primer and then apparently weathered with graphite powder. It's messy to use, or it can be. You've got to be quite careful with it. It's also very difficult to get a very dark look to it. So I've got a feeling that some areas on this model may actually have airbrushing and a couple of pin washes, but not many. But there's a couple of areas of true darkness that I don't seem to be able to replicate using this. It could be lighting, so I've double checked with different references to see what's what. And yeah, so my best guess is there's a little bit of airbrushing on the model, but I'm only going to do that at the end if it needs it. I'm not going to start with the darkest points because that's going to be a problem. If they're too dark relative to the graphite, I'm going to have issues later. So I'm going to start with the graphite powder. I'm going to work it into the crevices in this center section, and I'm going to hoover it out as I use it because I don't want this dust to go all over the place. This is now a sealed model. I can get to the inside to clean a little bit, but I don't want to fill it up with graphite powder. So this area here is what I'm going to start with today. That's the next time-lapse bit. I'm going to try and get it to match that. So what I'm attempting to do here is put on the graphite into areas of shading before I rub it. It's a messy old thing, and I found this to be the best way to get anything like a density to the colour, because it does tend to go a very bland grey, and I want something with a little bit more shading to it. So I find if I dump a big load of this in an area that's dark and then start to work it into that area, the overspill tends to graduate it into the other areas around it. So like with these two things here, they've got quite a light top on them, so I'm not going to rub the top, I'm just going to rub it around the edges, and then I'm going to push it into the corner of these at the bottom. And I'm thinking that's going to leave a nice darker area right in the corner where the bristles have a tendency to compress and shove it into the paint. But the top should remain a little brighter than the rest of it. But what I don't want to do is get a really fine graduation. I could get a lovely shaded effect where it's perfectly blended from white to black. That's not what I want. That's far too controlled for this. Right, now these little areas I can see on the reference, it's darker just on this strip, so I'm going to rub that in. You can see now how it's taken where the clump was. Same on this one, on the other side. It's a little bit darker on that section there. Because what I'm going to do is vacuum this after the first run, and then I'm going to put a clear lacquer on it, and the clear lacquer is going to seal this in. But when you put your clear lacquer on, don't do it too thick, because the little globules of lacquer will actually separate the graphite and turn it into little pools on the surface. There's a little triangular high spot there on the front of that bit, and more high spots to add whether in a brazier or in a rubber later on. But you can see now that the areas where I put the clumps have formed darker areas next to the detail, and what I'm following on the reference are these sections just running across here. See, it's darker just behind that, darker just behind that, and a couple of dark streaks on that side. This is the complete one. This could probably, I'm looking at here, is probably 3 layers of my paint job to try and replicate that. So the first layer is the basic essence of that shading, which is what I'm putting onto here. So keep on going. You can see kind of where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to follow. Got a little bit of graphite on the surface over here. That's not a problem, because we got one of these, a large kneaded putty rubber. And as I use this on the stand, if you didn't see that, I'll tell you what it is. It's a rubber. You can form it you can pull it into shape and squidge it about, and then you rub it over the surface of the model and it creates highlights. If you can see that, watch the top of this bell housing here. See that detail? If I run that over the top of it, just really picks out the depressions with the graphite and pulls the highlights out on the surface of the model. So you can increase the contrast as you go. It's quite workable. You've got to get all this done before you put your first clear coat on, because once you rub it with the clear coat, nothing's going to happen. Next sections I'm going to do are these two, just so I can pull those into as dark as possible. They're one of the darkest areas on the top, or on the bottom rather. We can see on the reference that this area is darker, like a big area here. Then it cuts back, it stops being dark about halfway between this two, and then it's dark consistently all the way through to the bottom. First layer of the bottom done. So now it's time to do the top. I can see that this ladder area here is grey in the middle and white at the ends, and well, I'll do it now. I've taken too much off there, so I'm going to add a bit back on. Just want to darken that centre section, because in the reference that's not pure white, so that's giving it a little bit of shade in the middle. There's a couple of white blobs where, when they did the original rubber to take off exactly what I'm doing when they made the real model, there's a little mark just here, like that. I'm going to leave that in. And there's another little mark just here that's like a semicircle here. Now these are marks that were put in by random when the guy was doing it originally. That's why these paint jobs have such a complexity to them that when you start to look, you can get down a rabbit hole pretty quickly. So there's a certain level that I want to get to on this. I'm obviously not going to make it exactly the same, that would just be ridiculous, but it's going to be as close approximation as I can to the real thing without getting too far down a rabbit hole. So that's what I'm doing. I'm adding more as needed. This area shaded in the corner, I took a little bit too much off with the rubber there. That's actually got a shaded area that runs out just a little bit further and has a weird kind of line to it just there. So it cuts into this panel line that I've just revealed by rubbing it off. There's a couple of little areas that are shaded there. There's another area here in the center that's slightly darker. And then this corner builds up as it is here. This area here is too thick, the shading. So what I've got to do is take that closer to the edge with my rubber. I'm not worried about this area. This is the one I'm working on at the moment. So I just want to get that a little tighter into there like that. See, just made it a bit thinner. It thickens up to the ends a little bit. Gets really squidgy at this end and then disappears a bit here. But you'll notice that what I'm doing is I'm rubbing with the rubber in the direction that the thing's going to be going forwards and backwards, so that any streaks that I put in are sympathetic to the direction of travel. Anyway, blah blah blah. You can see the darker areas here are not consistent. There's a large blob here, a large darker section here. Dark in the corner, tapers off at an angle this way. There's a dark streak here just near the circle. There's a dark splodge there and then really dark around on top. I'm doing the recesses first with the panel lines and these sections. I am then cleaning the tops of these, and then these will be done on the next pass when I've got this base done. Right, next reference hit. You can see on the back of this side here, there's weathering between the panels, and then there's a shaded area forward of the edge of the cutout of the armature at the end there. So we're looking at this. This needs to be masked off in this line here and then blended and also weathered in these little recesses. Here we go. The rear of this is nowhere near as heavily weathered as the front. A lot of people think it's got no weathering on it, but that's not true. There are some low lights in it to pull out the detail. So what I'm going to do is add some very, very light weathering to the rear details just to pull them out a little bit. Rinse and repeat. Okay, so now I've got some of the details on. We've got the shaded area on the top here, the two little circles, circle here. There's a few other details to put on, but I'm leaving them till later. So the next thing to do now is to pull all these very white panels into line with the reference. Just over here, you can see the subtle changes. Especially on this side here, you can see there's a darker area, there's a lot of streaks running backwards, and the same on this side, all kind of fanning out in lines. That's the next stage. So I'm working on this side here, trying to get all the various marks in the right places. Looks like a mess, but it's pretty accurate to this. we've got a few more details and streaks to put in, a few low lights on a few of these pieces, and then every one of these edges has got some rubber work just to highlight the edge of that raised section. You can see that with the dirt running through the middle there. So those areas have all got to be done, same around all these. And then getting the preparation right for the decals to go over the top of the shading here, so that you get the right colour difference between the white and the grey on the reference. Okay, we're done. That's it, finished. The last stretch is done. It's on the base, everything's done, all the weathering. It's completely done. Here's a montage, hope you like it.